Something is happening inside Nigeria's ruling party that the Aso Rock communications team does not want you to calculate. AFRONEWSHQ has obtained and cross-referenced intelligence from multiple senior political sources, state-level party insiders, and opposition coordination frameworks, pointing to the same conclusion. 5 serving governors, 14 former ministers who served under Buhari and Tinubu administrations, 8 former governors whose political networks remain active and funded, all of them in various stages of engagement with the ADC coalition. And the question this channel is asking today is not whether this is surprising. The political class moves toward power, always. The question is what this specific configuration, this specific combination of serving governors, former ministers and ex-governors does to the 2027 electoral map. And the honest answer, based on the institutional mathematics, the state-level network analysis, and the APC's internal cohesion data, is that it represents the most serious internal hemorrhage the APC has faced since it was formed in 2013. The APC was built on defection. It consolidated the ACN, CPC, ANPP, and a PDP faction into a single political vehicle that unseated an incumbent president in 2015. The party that was assembled by defection is now being disassembled by defection, and the vehicle receiving those defections is the ADC coalition that is simultaneously absorbing Peter Obi's organic mobilization network, Atiku's northern machine, and now, if this intelligence is accurate, significant elements of the APC's own state-level infrastructure. Today, AFRONEWSHQ is mapping that intelligence precisely, not with rumor, not with wishful opposition thinking, with the specific names, states, political networks, and strategic incentives that explain why APC insiders are making this calculation and what it means for Tinubu's 2027 re-election architecture. Most channels will give you the headline. We give you the architecture behind it. If you've never been here before, you just found Nigeria's most analytical political channel. Subscribe, because what comes next in this video is the part they hope you never piece together. Why APC insiders are moving. The internal mathematics of a failing political home. Before we can understand why 5 serving governors, 14 former ministers, and 8 ex-governors are positioning for ADC alignment, we need to understand the specific pressures driving the APC's internal fracture, because those pressures are the foundation on which every defection calculation rests. The APC under Tinubu is not the APC that won in 2015 or 2019. The Buhari-era APC was held together by a coalition of interests, Northern conservative religious identity, Yoruba political ambition, and a shared anti-PDP grievance narrative that transcended individual faction differences. That coalition had internal tensions. The Buhari-Tinubu relationship was never purely ideological, but it was held together by the disciplining power of federal patronage and the credible threat that defection meant political isolation. What has changed under Tinubu is that both of those binding mechanisms have weakened simultaneously. The federal patronage machine, the FAAC flows, the ministerial appointments, the federal contractor relationships that kept state-level political actors aligned with Abuja, has become less reliable as Nigeria's fiscal crisis deepens and as the Tinubu administration's economic reform program compresses the discretionary spending that traditionally lubricates political loyalty. Governors who expected federal partnership on infrastructure projects have been waiting. Former ministers who expected board appointments or diplomatic postings have been sidelined. The queue of APC insiders whose political interests are not being served by the current federal dispensation is longer than at any point since 2015. The second binding mechanism, the threat of political isolation for defectors, has been neutralized by the ADC coalition's scale. In previous cycles, a governor who defected from the APC faced the prospect of facing the federal government's full institutional weight in isolation on an opposition platform with limited national reach. The ADC coalition, as currently constituted, with Obi's organic mobilization, Tiku's northern network, and the emerging defection wave, is no longer a marginal opposition platform. It is increasingly the credible national alternative. The threat of isolation has been replaced by the possibility of arrival on the winning side before the 2027 primary window closes. The specific trigger: INEC's 2027 primary observation and candidate screening schedule creates a hard deadline for political realignment. Governors, ministers, and political figures who want to participate in the 2027 election on a platform other than the APC must complete their formal defection, including the legally required procedural steps that INEC monitors before that window closes. The political actors currently in engagement with the ADC coalition are not in preliminary conversation. They are in the operational planning that precedes formal announcement. The difference between where they are now and a public defection declaration is not political will. It is timing coordination, the sequencing of who announces first, which state moves before which governor covers his flank, and whether the ADC's portal crisis is resolved in time to receive their formal transfer of membership. The specific states where serving APC governors are engaging with the ADC coalition and the constitutional implications of a governor-level defection for APC's state structure will be mapped in detail in Section 3. The 14 former ministers' collective political networks span every geopolitical zone in Nigeria. What those networks add to the ADC coalition's ward-level infrastructure and what their defection removes from the APCs is the calculation that changes the 2027 model most dramatically. The 5 governors, what their states represent constitutionally. Let us build the defection map precisely, because this is where the Tinubu calculation becomes genuinely alarming from Asorok's perspective. The 5 serving APC governors, whose ADC engagement is at an advanced stage, represent states that collectively account for a significant portion of the APC's 2023 presidential vote delivery in their respective geopolitical zones. These are not peripheral states. They are states where the governor's control of the state party machinery, the local government chairman network, and the state government's deployment capacity is the difference between the APC reaching the 25% constitutional threshold in that zone and falling short of it. A serving governor who formally defects from the APC does not simply take himself to the ADC. He takes the state party's ward executive structure, which is staffed by political appointees loyal to him personally, not to Abuja. He takes the local government chairman, whose tenure and survival depend on the governor's political protection. He takes the state government contractor network, whose campaign funding contributions follow the state government's relationships. And in most cases, he takes at least a plurality of the state's National Assembly delegation, senators and House of Representatives members who understand that their 2027 re-election depends on the governor's political machinery, not on APC's national party structure. Multiply that institutional transfer by 5 governors across 5 states, and the APC is not simply losing 5 individuals, it is losing the operational infrastructure in 5 states that the APC needs to reach Section 134's constitutional threshold in those zones. The 14 former ministers, the network value beneath the headlines. The 14 former ministers currently in ADC engagement discussions represent a specific and often underestimated political asset: institutional knowledge of federal government operations, personal relationships with INEC officials at the administrative level, and most importantly, active political networks in states where they served as ministers and built constituency relationships that outlasted their ministerial tenure. A former minister's political network is not the same as a sitting minister's. It lacks access to federal patronage flows, but it retains something that federal patronage cannot manufacture: personal loyalty relationships built over years of constituency service, family connections in local political structures, and the credibility that comes from having delivered or been perceived to have delivered during time in office. 14 former ministers distributed across Nigeria's geopolitical zones represent a ward-level footprint that no coalition can buy or assemble artificially. Their defection to the ADC adds a layer of institutional credibility and local network access to an opposition coalition that, in 2023, struggled precisely because it lacked the kind of establishment-linked local operators who understand how Nigerian electoral administration actually functions at the result sheet level. The 8 ex-governors, the long-term infrastructure. Former governors in Nigerian politics are not retired political actors. They are long-term political investors whose networks remain active, funded, and capable of activation. A former governor who served 2 terms built, over 8 years of state executive control, relationships with thousands of political operatives across every local government in their state. Those relationships do not expire with the tenure. They persist as long as the ex-governor maintains the financial and political capacity to honor them. 8 ex-governors aligned with the ADC coalition means 8 states where the coalition can deploy a second layer of political infrastructure beneath the current sitting governor structure. In states where the sitting governor is APC and will not defect, the ex-governor network provides the ADC with the ability to contest at the ward level even without state government support. In states where the sitting governor is also defecting, the ex-governor network compounds the APC's institutional collapse in that state. The specific constitutional implication that AFRONEWSHQ's legal team is most concerned about is not the defection itself. It is the anti-defection clause litigation. Under Section 68(1)(g) of the 1999 Constitution, a member of the National Assembly who voluntarily abandons their party is liable to forfeit their seat, but the same provision contains a specific exception. If the defection is the result of a division in the party's governance structure or a merger of parties. Serving governors who defect are not subject to the same provision. Governors are not covered by Section 68 in the same way legislators are. The legal question that AFRONEWSHQ is currently mapping is whether the APC's own internal divisions, the Tinubu versus various APC faction disputes, are judicially recognizable as the kind of division that activates the constitutional exception. If any court finds that the APC's internal governance crisis constitutes a cognizable division, the anti-defection mechanism that Abuja is counting on to discipline defecting legislators becomes unenforceable. That is not a theoretical legal question. It is being actively litigated. Defection threat assessment. The combination of 5 serving governors, 14 former ministers, and 8 ex-governors moving to the ADC coalition represents the most structurally significant internal transfer of political infrastructure from APC to any opposition platform in the party's history. If fully executed before the 2027 primary window, it would transform the ADC from a coalition of independent opposition figures into a parallel establishment, a rival governing infrastructure capable of contesting INEC's administrative environment from the inside rather than from the outside. The 5 structural consequences of a governor, minister, ex-governor defection wave. Let us go through each dimension of the threat precisely. 1. The APC loses its state-level administrative advantage. The APC's 2023 electoral advantage was not built on ideology or superior policy delivery. It was built on the administrative capacity of state governments, the ability to deploy state resources, state personnel, and state government relationships with local administrative structures in service of the presidential ticket. A governor who controls his state's administrative machinery can influence through legal and quasi-legal means the environment in which votes are cast, counted, and reported. 5 governors removing that administrative capacity from the APC side of the 2027 equation and deploying it for the ADC coalition does not simply add 5 states to the opposition's column. It removes the APC's ability to use state government administration as an electoral management tool in those states. In close states, states where the margin between APC and the opposition is within the range that state-level administrative deployment can influence, this is the difference between winning and losing the state threshold. 2. The APC's funding network is compromised. Nigerian political funding does not flow through transparent party accounts. It flows through networks of governors, contractors, and political financiers whose relationships are managed at the state level. Former ministers and ex-governors are critical nodes in those funding networks, not because they currently control state resources, but because they mediate the relationships between federal contractors, state-level political financiers, and the party structure. 14 former ministers and 8 ex-governors moving to the ADC coalition takes their mediation capacity and the funding relationships they manage with them. The contractors and financiers who funded those individuals' political activities will follow the relationship, not the party. The APC's funding network in the states affected by this defection wave will contract precisely at the moment when the party most needs it to expand. 3. The APC's northern consensus fractures. The APC's ability to hold its northern coalition together in 2027 depends on maintaining the perception that northern political figures have more to gain inside the APC tent than outside it. The moment that calculus reverses, the moment that sitting governors, former ministers, and ex-governors publicly conclude that ADC alignment offers better prospects than APC loyalty, the northern political consensus fractures along individual interest lines rather than collective party lines. The 14 former ministers and 8 ex-governors in ADC engagement include figures from northern geopolitical zones whose public alignment with the ADC will signal to northern political actors at every level, senators, state representatives, local government chairmen, ward executives, that the safe harbor has shifted. Northern political actors are not ideologically committed to the APC. They are institutionally aligned with whoever controls access to the resources and positions that northern political networks depend on. Credible defection wave signals that access is moving. 4. The APC's 2027 primary becomes a liability management exercise. Every serving governor who has not yet defected but is known to be in ADC engagement creates a specific problem inside the APC's 2027 primary management. The party must decide, do you accommodate these governors, offer them concessions, positions, or assurances to prevent their defection, or do you discipline them, which risks accelerating the defection and making it public before the party has a containment strategy? Neither option is clean. Accommodation signals that defection threats are rewarded, which encourages more actors to use the same leverage. Discipline risks converting private engagement into public departure. The APC's 2027 primary management, which should be focused on ticket consolidation, running mate selection, and coalition expansion, is instead being consumed by the management of an internal defection crisis that limits the party's bandwidth for everything else. 5. The international perception of APC stability shifts. International investors, multilateral partners, and Nigeria's bilateral relationships are managed partly through the perception of political stability. A governing party that is visibly hemorrhaging senior figures, sitting governors, former ministers, ex-governors, does not project the stability that international capital and institutional partners price positively into their Nigeria risk assessments. The defection wave, regardless of its ultimate electoral consequences, is a political stability signal that feeds directly into the country risk calculations that determine foreign investment flows, bond market conditions, and multilateral program engagement. Tinubu's most dangerous response is not containment, it is acceleration. The Tinubu administration's political management instinct will be to offer concessions to defection candidates in order to stop the wave. But every concession offered to a figure in ADC engagement has the opposite effect. It signals that the administration is under pressure, which reduces the cost of defection for the next actor in line. The actors currently in ADC engagement are watching each other's treatment. The administration's response to the first public defector will determine whether the remaining actors in private engagement conclude that the window for a negotiated exit from the APC is open or closed. If Tinubu offers generous terms to early defectors, he creates an incentive for more defections. If he responds with institutional punishment, he confirms that the APC's internal governance is the confrontational environment that drove the defection consideration in the first place. There is no clean version of this response. That is the nature of an advanced defection dynamic. Tinubu's 4 available counter-strategies. Counter-strategy 1. Selective co-optation. The most targeted response is to identify the 2 or 3 governors whose defection would be most damaging based on their state's constitutional threshold significance and make those individuals specifically targeted offers, ministerial appointments for allies, federal project approvals for their states, or administrative accommodations in their legal or political situations that make APC loyalty personally beneficial. This is surgical rather than comprehensive. It concedes some losses to prevent the most damaging losses. Counter-strategy 2. Institutional enforcement. The anti-defection clause, the deployment of EFCC and other federal investigative agencies toward politically exposed persons in defection territory, and the withholding of federal allocations or approvals are the institutional tools available to a federal executive managing a defection crisis. These tools have been used in every previous Nigerian political cycle. Their effectiveness is limited by the fact that every actor currently in ADC engagement has already priced this response into their calculation. Counter-strategy 3. Ticket restructuring. If Tinubu restructures his 2027 ticket architecture to offer the vice presidential position or other senior platform positions to figures from the zones most affected by the defection wave, he reduces the defection incentive for actors in those zones who have not yet formally committed. A credible offer of a position inside the APC's 2027 architecture is more effective than disciplinary threat for actors who are defecting primarily for career advancement reasons rather than ideological ones. Counter-strategy 4. ADC portal crisis. The ADC portal crisis is the current example of institutional disruption of the opposition's operational capacity. If the Tinubu administration can sustain the portal crisis beyond the primary window, preventing the ADC from formally receiving and processing the defecting governors and ministers, the defection wave becomes politically stranded. Actors who have publicly broken with the APC but cannot formally register with a credible opposition platform are in the worst political position, outside the governing party's protection but unable to operationalize their opposition alignment. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. We have mapped the defection architecture and the counter strategies. Now let us examine what this wave means for Nigerian democracy, the APC's institutional survival, and the 2027 electoral landscape as a whole. What a governor-level defection wave does to Nigerian party politics. The most important national implication of the APC defection wave is not which party benefits in 2027. It is what it reveals about the structural condition of Nigerian political parties and the incentive architecture that governs political loyalty in Africa's largest democracy. Nigerian political parties have never been ideological institutions. They have been patronage distribution networks with electoral functions. The APC in 2015 2015 was assembled from actors who had previously been in the PDP, ACN, CPP and ANPP, not because those actors had converging policy visions, but because they had converging interests in displacing Goodluck Jonathan's administration and accessing the federal patronage that came with doing so. The APC in 2022-2023 faced an internal defection when its own figures, including Peter Obi and Labour Party, concluded that the party's internal primary process had produced a candidate who did not represent their political interests. What is happening now is the next iteration of the same dynamic. Governors, ministers and ex-governors who concluded in 2022 that Tinubu's APC offered the best available patronage access are recalculating. The patronage flows have not met expectations, the political protection has not been delivered at the scale they anticipated, and the alternative, the ADC coalition, is now sufficiently credible as a national platform that the cost of defection is lower than the cost of continued loyalty to an administration that has not served their interests. The implication for democratic consolidation. The defection wave has a paradoxical relationship with Nigerian democratic quality. On one hand, a political system in which senior figures can defect from the governing party to a credible opposition without immediate institutional destruction demonstrates a level of democratic openness that distinguishes Nigeria from more authoritarian regional neighbors. The freedom of association that makes defection possible is a democratic asset, not a liability. On the other hand, a political system in which defection is driven entirely by patronage calculation rather than policy disagreement produces opposition platforms that are structurally identical to the governing party they are challenging. An ADC coalition that absorbs APC governors, ministers and ex-governors does not automatically become a policy alternative to the APC. It becomes an APC faction operating under a different party label. The voters who want genuine policy change, the obedient movement's demand for governance quality, not merely governance personnel change, may find that a defection-heavy ADC coalition is not the vehicle they are looking for. The security dimension. A defection wave of this magnitude, sitting governors, former ministers, ex-governors, occurring in the run-up to a presidential election, creates specific security risks that AFRONEWSHQ will not avoid naming. Governors who are defecting from the APC retain the security agencies and administrative apparatus of their state governments. The potential for state-level security deployments to be used in service of the defecting governor's political realignment rather than in service of neutral electoral administration is elevated in states where the defection is occurring. The Nigerian security architecture is aware of this risk. DSS, the police command structure, and INEC's state commissioners are all monitoring the defection dynamic in affected states. But monitoring is not the same as prevention. The institutional preparation required to ensure that a multi-state governor defection wave does not produce security incidents around the 2027 primary and general election windows needs to begin now, at the planning and command coordination level, not in the immediate pre-election period when the incidents have already occurred. The international signal. A governing party that is losing sitting governors to the opposition sends a specific signal to Nigeria's international partners that the current administration's internal political management is under significant stress and that the 2027 political outcome is more uncertain than it appeared 12 months ago. International capital and institutional partners adjust their Nigeria positioning in response to this signal. The adjustment is not always negative. Competitive elections are a democratic quality indicator, but the uncertainty premium that political risk markets attach to a credibly contested election affects Nigeria's sovereign borrowing costs, FDI flows, and multilateral program negotiations in the period leading up to the election. The strongest argument against the defection wave's electoral impact. AFRONEWSHQ does not do one-sided analysis. Here are the strongest arguments against the scenario this video has been building. Argument 1. Intelligence reports about defection engagement are not defections. The political history of Nigerian pre-election cycles is full of intelligence reports, sourced leaks, and political positioning that describe defection engagement that never materialize as public announcements. Governors regularly engage with opposition platforms as a negotiating tool against Abuja. The threat of defection is a bargaining chip, not necessarily a committed intention. The 14 former ministers in ADC engagement may be in ADC engagement because they want to be seen as in ADC engagement, which increases their leverage in whatever negotiation they are actually pursuing with the Tinubu administration. Reports of defection engagement and actual defections are very different political events. Argument 2. The APC's state-level infrastructure is more durable than individual actors. The APC's ward executive structures in most states are not personally loyal to the governor as an individual. They are institutionally embedded in the party's administrative relationship with INEC. Their recognition, their accreditation, their administrative standing all flow from the party, not from the sitting governor. A governor who defects does not automatically take the ward executive structure with him. The ward executives face a choice between following the governor to an uncertain new platform and maintaining their institutionally recognized position within the APC. In most states, the majority of ward executives will choose institutional security over personal loyalty. The APC's state infrastructure is more resilient to governor defection than the defection narrative suggests. Argument 3. The ADC's portal crisis means it cannot receive defectors at scale. The most fundamental constraint on the defection wave's electoral impact is the ADC's operational status. A party whose INEC portal access is under litigation cannot formally process membership transfers, cannot conduct a certifiable primary, and cannot administratively receive the defecting governors, ministers, and ex-governors in a way that INEC will recognize as legally valid for the purpose of candidate screening. The political significance of the defection wave is irrelevant if the ADC cannot operationalize it before the 2027 primary window, and the portal crisis is not resolved. The 2027 election will not be decided by the party with the most impressive defection portfolio. It will be decided by the party whose ward-level agents are present at every polling unit, with trained result sheet literacy. Nigerian presidential elections are not decided by political architecture at the governor or ministerial level. They are decided in 8,809 wards across 774 local government areas. The candidate who wins is the candidate whose party has a trained agent at every polling unit, who is present when the votes are counted, who can read and challenge the result sheets in real time, and who does not leave the polling unit until the form has been correctly completed and transmitted. The Obedient Movement's 2023 failure was not inadequate political architecture. It was inadequate polling unit agent density and training in the 24 states where the constitutional threshold was not reached. A 2027 coalition that has 5 defecting governors plus 14 former ministers plus 8 ex-governors but no systematic ward-level agent training and deployment program is a better press release than an electoral operation. Whether the ADC coalition can convert its political architecture into ward-level operational capability is the question that decides everything. The state-level constitutional impact. We said we would map the specific constitutional implications of governor-level defection. The conclusion: 5 sitting governors defecting from the APC and deploying their state administrative infrastructure for the ADC coalition reduces the APC's reliable constitutional threshold states by a range of 3 to 5, depending on whether the ward executive structures follow the governor or remain with the party. That reduction places the APC's constitutional threshold achievement, which in 2023 was comfortable at 30 states, into genuine competitive territory for the first time since 2015. The uncertainty range, 3 to 5 rather than a single number, reflects the specific variables that determine which end of that range the APC absorbs, whether the anti-defection litigation produces injunctions that restrain defecting legislators, whether the ADC's portal crisis is resolved in time to formally receive the defectors, and whether Tinubu's counter-strategy successfully holds any of the 5 governors inside the APC tent through targeted concession. The former minister's network value. We said we would identify what the 14 former ministers add to the ADC coalition's ward-level infrastructure. The answer is specific. Former ministers from states where the ADC coalition currently lacks party administrative presence provide the coalition with a locally credible organizing identity in those states, a known face, a network of constituency relationships, and the institutional knowledge of how federal administrative processes work at the local level. In states where the ADC is essentially starting from zero in 2027, a former minister's network is the difference between a party with nominal presence and a party with functional campaign infrastructure. The 5 signals to watch before 2027. First, the ADC portal injunction ruling. Without portal access, the coalition cannot formally receive defecting members in a way INEC will recognize. Every day without the injunction is a day the defection wave cannot be operationally converted. Second, the first public defection announcement. The first sitting governor or senior APC figure who publicly announces ADC alignment will break the information seal that is currently keeping the full defection list private. Watch the response from both the APC's counter-strategy and from the other figures in engagement to understand the defection wave's true depth. Third, EFCC and anti-corruption agency deployments in states with defection-engaged governors. The institutional enforcement counter-strategy produces a specific observable pattern: sudden investigation announcements, asset freeze applications, or prosecution acceleration targeting political figures in states where the governor is in ADC engagement. These are not coincidences. They are signals of the counter-strategy in operation. The APC's 2027 ticket announcement timing. A party that is confident in its internal cohesion announces its ticket on a strategic timeline. A party managing an advanced defection crisis announces its ticket early to foreclose the defection window by forcing internal actors to take a position before the primary. If Tinubu's APC announces its 2027 ticket architecture earlier than the political calendar requires, that is a containment signal, not a confidence signal. Fifth, Kwankwaso's response to the defection wave. Kwankwaso's Kwankwasia movement has been in negotiation with the ADC coalition, a defection wave that adds 5 governors and 14 former ministers to the coalition dramatically improves the ADC's governance credibility, which is precisely the kind of signal that could push Kwankwaso's calculation from continued independent positioning to formal ADC integration. Kwankwaso's response to the defection wave is the most important secondary signal for the ADC coalition's 2027 completeness. Best case and worst case. Best case for the ADC coalition. Portal access restored by court order within 60 days. The first governor publicly defects and the APC's counter-strategy fails to stop the cascade. Former ministers formally integrate their state networks into the ADC party structure. Kwankwaso formally aligns and the coalition enters the 2027 primary season with 5 states worth of administrative infrastructure on its side, ward-level agent deployment funded and coordinated, and the ADC positioned as the establishment-endorsed opposition, a genuinely national coalition with both organic mobilization capacity and institutional governance depth. Worst case for the coalition: portal access not restored before the primary window. The first public defector is punished so effectively through institutional enforcement that the remaining actors in private engagement step back from their ADC positioning. The 14 former ministers fragment into individual negotiations with the APC rather than presenting as a coordinated bloc, and the defection wave that was positioned as the most significant internal hemorrhage in APC history becomes a series of quiet individual retreats that the APC survives with its constitutional threshold arithmetic intact. The trajectory toward best case or worst case is determined in the next 90 days, not by analysts, not by this channel, by the choices of 5 actors: the Federal High Court judge on the portal injunction, the first governor who decides whether to go public, Bola Ahmed Tinubu's political management team, Peter Obi as the ADC coalition's mobilization anchor, and Atiku Abubakar as the coalition's northern infrastructure guarantor. We began with the claim that 5 serving APC governors, 14 former ministers, and 8 ex-governors are ready to join the ADC. Let us be precise about what that claim means and what it does not mean. It means that the APC's internal defection dynamic is at a more advanced stage than the public narrative has acknowledged. The actors in engagement are not making preliminary inquiries. They are in the operational planning phase that precedes formal public announcement. The question is not whether this defection wave exists. The question is whether the ADC's portal crisis, the APC's counter-strategy, and the individual actors' final personal calculations allow it to materialize before the 2027 primary window. It does not mean that the APC is collapsing. The party that survived the 2022 Labour Party defection, the internal Osinbajo-Tinubu primary contest, and the post-2023 reconciliation process with its northern factions is not a brittle institution. It has demonstrated resilience under internal pressure that more ideologically coherent parties would not have survived. Its incumbency advantages, federal administrative authority, security agency deployment, FAAC allocation control remain structurally significant regardless of the defection wave. What this defection intelligence represents is the clearest available signal that the 2027 election is not the foregone APC re-election that Abuja's political management team was modeling 12 months ago. The internal mathematics of the governing party are more contested than the public posture suggests, and the ADC coalition is now absorbing not just opposition figures and organic mobilization movements, it is absorbing the APC's own institutional infrastructure, one governor, one minister, one ex-governor at a time. Watch the 5 signals, follow the court filing, listen for the first public announcement. Those will tell you, before any analyst, before any press release, before any official confirmation, whether Nigeria is entering the most competitive and consequential pre-election political realignment since 2014. You now know something that most Nigerians watching the news tonight do not know. What you do with that is up to you. Share it, debate it, challenge it. That is how democracies survive. AFRONEWSHQ. Nigeria deserves better analysis. See you in the next one.